Welcome everyone on into another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. This, of course, is the show that takes a look at the week that was in Washington, D.C. through the lens of the second Trump administration. David Brody on holiday this week. We are once again joined by Dan Andros, host of the CBN podcast Quick Start. But we are also joined by CBN News White House correspondent Kelly Wright to help break down what happened this week in D.C. and at the White House. Gentlemen, let's jump right into it. And some breaking news as we were recording here on Friday morning, and that is federal investigators raided the home of President Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, his home in Bethesda, Maryland, at 7 a.m. Eastern time on Friday morning. It's all part of an investigation launched by FBI Director Kash Patel, which is said to involve a search for classified documents. Reportedly, this investigation began during the Biden administration, but ended at some point during the Biden administration without going to these lengths. But now here, there is this raid of Bolton's Bethesda home, and they're also going to be raiding his offices, assuming that we're looking for classified documents. The FBI is. Kelly, let me come to you first on this. What is the latest that you're hearing on this? What is the FBI trying to find? What is at the center of all this?
When John Bolton wrote a book about the Trump administration, he used a lot of information, and he didn't get a lot of clearance from the government to write the book that he did, according to the reason for this search. Because of that, they are searching his documents to find out if he used classified information in order to write that book. Other people have done this in the past. You look at former FBI Director James Comey, where they've used material that they had actually encountered and actually witnessed and utilized when they were in those prominent positions within the Trump administration. So that's the rub here. Did he actually use classified information without having permission from the federal government to actually put that into a book? Because you need to go through checks and balances. If I were writing a book and I use material that's privy to only CBN leaders, and I didn't go run it through them, they would have every right to investigate me and say, well, did you use this? Did you have our permission? Did we proof it? So that's where things are with this. I can tell you, having interviewed John Bolton in the past, he's probably looking at all of this and he's lawyered up and prepared to take on Kash Patel and the FBI, as well as the President of the United States. The two of them at one time were allies. Things broke during the initial presidency of Donald Trump when he was president at 45, and they broke ranks from each other. John Bolton has a very, very deep understanding of Russia and politics. That's just adding on to what's going on. But a lot of people, critics, will look at this and say that Kash Patel and the president are going after those who have spoken out against President Trump. And so politically, many people will say this is really the impetus for doing this, and not so much the classified documents. And if those classified documents have been used, and it is proven to be true, then John Bolton needs to own up to that and face the consequences of using that without permission. If it's nothing more than President Trump going after some of his political enemies, then this will be out there on discussion from left and right, woke and unwoke people for some time to come.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, Dan, both things can be true here, right? This can be
That's right.
Politically motivated, and it can also be,
Right.
There also could have been some wrongdoing here. But certainly, Democrats are going to point to hypocrisy here, specifically because President Trump himself got into a lot of legal trouble because of the classified documents that were found at Mar-a-Lago and his attempts to try and keep the Justice Department from getting them back. So when Democrats and Trump opponents are criticizing this investigation as being hypocritical, the fact remains if classified information was taken from someplace and used improperly, it really doesn't matter what the politics of it are, but the public perception of the raid. I'm curious how you feel the public will perceive this, if they'll be paying attention to the details and just hear classified documents, hear Trump, hear Biden, hear Bolton, and what they might think of this.
Well, the whole thing is interesting because I feel like we've gone into a whole new territory where The deep state politics, the bureaucrats haven't really crossed too much and too often in the past. And that is just throwing any legal sort of action you can at people when you are annoyed at somebody or when you want to go after somebody. And, and just as, Republicans, as Democrats can complain about Republicans and saying, well, you're hypocritical, you called the other stuff a witch hunt. Well, same can be true for them because they were, how can they complain about it? That's easy for me to say. But how can they do that if they were engaging in the same sorts of activities? So the shoe it goes both ways on that one. So it's tough to kind of take that complaint seriously. But I do think we've kind of got into new territory here where this seems more like par for the course than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get more details. We'll get more details on this as the story unfolds over the weekend and into next week. But I do want to shift to what at the beginning of the week was the big story. And that, of course, was the visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to the White House, his second trip to the White House since a trip back in February that went completely off the rails. This time, certainly a much warmer meeting between the two leaders. And Volodymyr Zelenskyy was backed by a cadre of European leaders who also were voicing their concern about the way forward. And it seemed at the beginning of the week, Kelly, like we were heading towards the next step. We were heading towards either a trilateral meeting between Putin, Zelenskyy, and Trump, or a bilateral meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin. But now here on Friday, we're hearing some different things coming out of Moscow. Russia's top diplomat is saying that there are no plans for a meeting between Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy. So, Kelly, what's the latest that you're hearing at the White House and on a potential meeting, whether it's just between the two leaders, the three leaders, or what's next?
So let's start where things really are. All of this is really the behavior and the pattern of behavior that Vladimir Putin has continued to use with regard to Ukraine and meeting with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine. Putin has always dodged having any kind of meeting with him in a bilateral fashion. Perhaps going for the trilateral meeting would have been better, hindsight being 2020. In fact, when Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited the president in the Oval Office, he actually said to the president of the United States, I would welcome you joining me for a meeting with Vladimir Putin in a trilateral meeting, understanding that because of what took place just a week ago in Alaska, the president meeting face-to-face with Putin, Zelenskyy, as well as the 7 EU leaders who came here in support of the president of the United States, as well as in support of the president of Ukraine, realized that there was an opportunity here, maybe a very thin window, a crack in the window with Putin in order to strike some sort of deal that would lead to a peace deal. If you'll recall, the EU leaders and Zelenskyy weren't keen on going directly to a peace settlement because they feel that that would have required some land giving that Putin had taken by force and by invasion. So here we are. The ball is in Putin's court in terms of having this bilateral meeting. President Trump obviously is putting pressure on Putin to make sure that this bilateral meeting takes place and not a trilateral meeting. I can tell you that the president grows very frustrated with Putin. He grows very frustrated with Zelenskyy because he believes that both men need to come to the table and settle this because of the thousands of people who die weekly in Ukraine because of the attacks from Russia. Now, having said that, how is the president going to deal with getting Vladimir Putin to open up, go to a meeting in Budapest or wherever the White House might be able to pick a place where they can go, a neutral place, so that Putin can really sit down and have a dialogue with Zelenskyy, and the president realizes that both of these men are very hostile towards each other. They don't like each other. And because of that, it might be important for the president to try to broker that trilateral meeting on his own. It's a good.
And Kelly, I want to ask you one other question about what the president could do, or what the Trump administration could do to urge Putin to come to the table. And one of the things we've heard about is in Congress, specifically Republican Senator Lindsey Graham wants to put together some pretty crippling sanctions against Russia if Putin doesn't start to move forward towards coming together with some kind of meeting, whether it's one-on-one or with the president involved. I guess my question is, how much time do you think Putin has? It sounds like the president in the past few weeks has been growing more and more impatient with the Russian leader. Could we see Congress, or when they get back, or even before then, could we see the threat of really severe sanctions start to take hold, maybe even next week before Congress comes back?
Look, first of all, getting back to Senator Lindsey Graham, he has already put that into motion. That is something that he wants to do with or without the president. He is very strong on supporting Ukraine. He believes that this is something that should have been done a long time ago. He publicly acknowledges that he's of the opinion that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. The EU leaders who came here have said the same thing. The president knows that. The president has been able to get Putin to the table because, if you recall, he put a extra tariff on India for purchasing Russian oil. So he started cutting him off. That, many people say, is the reason why Putin showed up in Alaska for that very public meeting with the president of the United States in Anchorage, Alaska. The president pulled back and said, I'm not going to impose the sanctions right now. He wanted to give an opportunity for Putin to have a bilateral meeting with Zelenskyy. Now, many of the critics said, Mr. President, that is not the thing to do. I'm speaking of the EU leaders. What we need to do is actually put the pressure on Vladimir Putin. And some generals here in America have said the same thing publicly, stating that Putin is not the kind of guy you can play around with and be nice to. You have to go hardcore. And the president can actually impose these sanctions quickly. He's already stated that he would do so in the past. If you recall, before he went to Alaska, I was there last week at the Kennedy Center during the press briefing, and one of my colleagues from another network asked the president the question, if Putin does not agree to have a trilateral meeting or a bilateral meeting and come to a ceasefire or a peace deal, will he face consequences? Keep in mind, the president said at that point in time, yes, he faced consequences and they will be severe. So the severe consequences would be to impose those sanctions and those secondary tariffs against India, against China, and any other country that relies on Russia for its oil. And then you start attacking their oil and gas, and you create an economic collapse since Russia depends on that.
Dan, I thought it was really striking with Zelenskyy in the Oval Office with President Trump at the beginning of the week when you compare it to the contentious meeting that the two leaders had back in February. The differences couldn't be more stark. And I'm just curious, what were your thoughts on this second meeting with Zelenskyy and Trump as compared to the first meeting? Why do you think we saw such a change in tone?
Well, I think Trump perhaps maybe has learned a little bit from his last back and forth earlier this year when he it seemed like he maybe trusted Putin. I don't know what they talked about behind closed doors, but he got burned publicly by Putin. He thought Putin was going to come to the table. He thought by maybe perhaps showing that he could be a little harder. He wasn't just going to be Team Ukraine all the way and not have no criticism for Ukraine. He thought maybe that would give him a little leeway and a little credibility with Putin. And then Putin turned around and burned him publicly and just kind of kept on going with the war. And so I think that frustrated President Trump. And so now here we are in round two of this. And as Kelly was talking about all these levers that Trump has ready to pull as leverage, I think he came in a lot more prepared this time with, okay, if he comes in and he plays hardball with this, I'm going to go ahead and take these actions. So I think it seemed to me like he had a little bit more of a game plan this time, assuming that perhaps Putin might do this or try to do this again. And we saw the reaction, John, after this meeting that you just talked about with Zelenskyy there and all these European leaders there. Now what happens? Now we've got military salvos going back and forth between Russia and Ukraine. And so I think Putin's not the kind of guy that's going to just sit there and make it look like, oh, they met and now I'm coming to the table. So he wants to be looking like he's the one in charge. So we'll see if this is just sort of posturing to sort of not make it look like he got pushed to the table and that he's going to do it on his terms. But I do think because of all the things that Kelly went through, that Putin's going to have to come to the table. He's just going to have to. Or else this thing's going to get just worse and worse and worse for them as this thing drags out.
And Dan, if I could quickly add to your point, John, just if I could just add to Dan's point, keep in mind when the EU leaders were here along with Zelenskyy, they're talking about something very significant, and that's Article 5, NATO-like security guarantees. Right. In order to go forward with any deal, Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people will need security guarantees that are similar to Article 5. What does that mean? If you attack one member of NATO, it's an attack on all members of NATO, which means all NATO forces get involved in the fray. And Putin has not had to deal with that. Now the EU leaders and NATO are now stating that they are going to put those guarantees into place. The President of the United States agrees with that. That means they will be putting boots on the ground. The President of the United States has made it very clear he will not put U.S. boots on the ground, but may provide air cover. That's very important. That means our Air Force apparatus will get involved in some sort of way. I don't want to get ahead of the president. I don't want to get ahead of the EU. I don't want to get ahead of NATO. But putting those guarantees in place prevents Putin from structuring some sort of peace deal or ceasefire deal, and only to rip it up in a piece of paper. In other words, those security guarantees are in place. He knows that he's dealing with more than just Ukrainian forces. He has to deal with EU forces. He also has to deal with air power from the United States and military assets. Here's the very important matter. Military assets that Ukraine can use for offensive purposes, which means if Ukraine gets those military assets from the EU, and it's all funded by the EU, by the way, they can use those assets to actually strike deep into the heart of Russia, pretty much the same way that Russia has been striking deep into the heart of Ukraine, with the exception that Ukraine has only been focusing on military targets, quite different from Russia. They've been focusing on civilian targets.
And those security guarantees, wouldn't that effectively make Ukraine a de facto NATO member? I mean, that's been Russia's biggest fear all along.
One could argue that it would. Part of the deal that Putin wants, he doesn't want any discussion of NATO. If you go back to what President Trump originally stated, is that he felt that Putin felt put upon by the fact that Ukraine had made overtures to become a member of NATO. NATO had made overtures to Ukraine. He said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's discuss this. And that rattled the nerves of Putin. But did it really? When you think about Putin and his diabolical plans and how he goes in, like he took Crimea after striking a deal, this guy just goes in where he wants to go to take over properties that do not belong to him. Since the fall of communism, the fall of the USSR, he has been trying to resurrect the socialist state of Russia and Mother Russia, to expand it rather than to respect his neighbors who have already stated they wanted some autonomy to stand on their own. So not only you have concerns with Ukraine, but you have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and even Poland to some degree, and then Finland. The president of Finland was here, and he said, we are right there. We have 800 miles of the border of Russia, and we can tell you, we do not want this man being able to strike Ukraine or any neighboring country that is a part of NATO or not even, or even within close proximity to the EU and NATO.
Well, let's move on to another subject. And we are now, I think it's week 2, full second week of President Trump's federal takeover of law enforcement in Washington, D.C. The White House Communications Office put out some numbers at the end of the week here, noting carjackings are down 83%. They say robberies are down 46%, car thefts down 21%. They say violent crime is down 22%, and that in 1 week, 500 arrests were made. Dan, politically speaking, there have been vocal opponents to this, but I know local law enforcement has seemingly been embracing the extra federal help here. The question is whether or not this is making the areas of Washington, D.C. that and traditionally have experienced most of the crime, are they making those areas safer? It's also been President Trump's plan to help re-beautify the city by removing homeless encampments and homeless tents. Here in week 2, how do you think things are going so far?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you have this much of a presence, I mean, it's almost going to just by default get a little bit better. It's, with that kind of a presence, you're just going to naturally see a drop in criminal activities that are going on. The big question is going to be what happens after they have to go after this 30-day mark. Is there any long-standing change, perhaps? And perhaps there might be. And he's kind of Trump has floated the idea of maybe doing this in other cities, which would be probably even a difficult legal sort of hurdle to get over. But I think politically speaking, I mean, I think it's gone well for Trump because yes, there are going to be liberals and Democrats who don't like Trump, who are complaining and everything else. But a lot of people are not thrilled with the amount of brazen criminal activity that takes place in places like Washington, D.C. and in major cities. Now, we know that cities are always going to have more crime than other places. It's just typical. It's what happens when you have lots of people in a condensed area. You're going to see a little more a frequency of that sort of activity. But I think most people can agree that in the last several years, it seems to have gotten a little out of hand. You see people in like San Francisco, just the smash and grabs, right? Just let's get 30 people together and let's just go in and smash and grab. Or people walking in with a cart and a mask, loading up their carts at a CVS and just heading on out. And there's nothing you can do about it. And police aren't around. So coming on the heels of the defund the police and we need less police and complaining about the police, it seems like, and it's always hard to tell because you don't know what's media narrative per se. And am I just seeing more of this in my social feed? But it sure seems like there's more of this. And even mainstream media anchors that work in Washington, D.C. who have no love for Trump have admitted, yeah, it's pretty bad here. I got mugged. And it's like when everyone's sharing their I got mugged, Me Too story, it's kind of hard to deny that something needed to be done.
Yeah. And Kelly, obviously the critics of this are kind of pointing to this being a publicity stunt. That's what they would claim that this is. We've seen in some very high profile areas, very, very large presence, a very large presence of National Guard troops and other officers in place. But, as you've kind of been around the city, what have you observed and what have you observed from how the White House is handling this?
Well, I'll start with the last part of your question. The White House has been handling this in a way of staying stalwart and focused on the federalization of Washington, D.C. to root out the lawlessness that goes on. And there are National Guard troops augmenting the police. This is the Metropolitan Police Force of Washington, D.C. It's comprised of 3,500 law enforcement officers. They are working side by side with the National Guard. Initially, there were 800 National Guard troops here, or units, I should say. And then you have Republican states sending in their National Guard units as well. So the White House has remained very focused, putting all hands on deck for that, as well as removing some of those homeless encampments. Now, from a standpoint of what's happening within the city, you have to keep in mind, I grew up in this city, and I spent a number of years growing up in Ward 8, which right now, by statistics, Ward 8 has always been one of the highest crime areas in the city of Washington, D.C. It has always held the highest murder rate in the city of Washington, D.C., albeit those numbers have gone down. There's some criticism from the White House saying that, well, we believe those numbers are fudged. They're looking into that. But here's the deal. I went out for myself, out of my own curiosity, knowing that I would be talking about this story, reporting on this story this past week when Caroline Leavitt held the news briefing. She was asked this question about why do we see more National Guard troops in the tourist areas around Union Station, around the monument, around those areas that are heavily visited by tourists, and not in the high crime areas. And she said, contrary to what you have said, speaking to the members of the media, we have been in Ward 8 and Ward 7 combating the crime that goes on there. So I followed up on that. I don't know if it was the time of day, but I went out to my old neighborhood, and I know how rough that was when I was growing up. There's still some issues there. And when I went there, I only saw one police car. I did not see National Guard units. And it could have been the location that I went to be fair, it was during the day. So perhaps at nighttime is when we see the increase, because the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt did say that they have increased the arrests there and that they're making it safe again. And I do know for a fact that many of the residents in that community want to see something done to stop the lawlessness that does go on. And look, I have to vouch for that area. There are really good people there, great people who have been mired in criminal activity, encroaching upon their desire to live good lives and become productive citizens of the nation's capital. And they're proud of the nation's capital. So I think there's a lot of give and take in this. There are two things going on. And so because of that, the messaging has to get on point. And I think the White House can do better about messaging. Of course, Democrats need to stop. They need to admit that crime does happen in Washington, D.C. They're fighting a losing battle, and the president has taken ownership of this to fight crime, to stop it, and to also do something about the homelessness. Are there better ways to do this? I don't know how she fight crime except going after it. Are there better ways to deal with the homeless people? I think there are some initial things that the White House could be doing. For example, working and partnering with a lot of the faith-based entities and groups that are on the front lines to deal with homelessness, as well as the juvenile problem. If you recall, and I mean, I'm sorry to go on so long about this, but if you recall, the president talked about there were homegrown gangs here. And the question I've been trying to get to the White House is, okay, that's a given. What do you do to prevent those homegrown gangs from being able to go out to recruit or taunt or scare other innocent children into those gangs? Because that is a problem of growing up on the streets. And I can say that from a personal standpoint, because when I was growing up on the streets of Washington, D.C. and Southeast Washington, gangs would approach me saying, join us or get beaten. So so you've got to change the culture as well. So I think there's much more that can be done. I was fortunate. I had a good mentor in my mother who exposed me to other great mentors who actually worked hard and diligently to keep my mind focused on the great things. So all of this going on, guys, the whole thing is that I hope it all makes Washington, D.C. better. I hope it all becomes a beacon of hope to the rest of the nation. Can we do it better? I think we can. I think we can do it better with better communication and actually seeing the president engage with some of these units that are out there in the ground, mentoring these kids, as well as people who are out there helping the homeless, as well as people who support the police in what they're doing.
Right. And the president has, and the Trump administration has about 2 more weeks left on this action before Congress would need to step in and solidify it as more of a long-term solution as well.
Exactly.
But we'll see how things shake out here over the next couple of weeks. But thank you for sharing all that, Kelly. That was a great insight into kind of the issues and the problems that I think need to be solved here in Washington, D.C. and in, like Dan said, cities across America. Last thing to get into here. This has been fascinating. Governor Gavin Newsom of California has been changing his social media presence a little bit. And I'm sure he has some folks who are helping him with this, probably on the younger side of things. But if you've been online at all and you use the X platform at all, you have noticed that some of Governor Gavin Newsom's tweets look a whole lot like some of the social media posts that you would see from President Trump. In all caps, it's acting as a parody account, essentially. And Republican commentators on some of the cable networks and certainly a lot of conservatives who support the president are not happy about what it is that they're seeing. We're showing you some of the screen grabs right now if you're watching this on YouTube. Dan, he's calling his Gavin Newsom's calling his political adversaries. He's calling them names, typing in all caps. I mean, this is clearly an effort not only to raise his profile, which, by the way, I think is working. It seems like he has now risen to the top of the Democratic field for 2028, and we're still a long ways away from that. But this is all part of that plan, but also to get under the skin of President Trump and get under the skin of conservatives. I think it's brilliant. It's kind of making it look like, this is what it looks like from the other side, but I don't know. He's the governor of California. Is it an appropriate way to communicate if you're going to criticize how President Trump communicates? I think it's fascinating.
I mean, if it's like an elaborate troll, then maybe, but I think it just looks like he's copying President Trump. And the critique on Newsom right now is that this is like his seventh persona that he's tried to throw at the wall to get to stick to see if he can get some traction for 2028. Now, what's interesting to me is the whole going after Trump thing, because President Trump is not on the ticket in the midterms. He is not on the ticket in 2028. So I don't know that sitting here, I really get the sense, guys, that Democrats and the left, yes, there's always going to be that group that's complaining and protesting out there in the streets. There's always, doesn't matter who's in there. There's always some of those. I think most people by and large are just like, okay, Trump won. We've got Trump now for the next 4 years. Let's look forward. I just don't know that yelling about Trump is going to do anything for you. And I think people want to see well, what are you going to do in the future? Are you going to make the rest of America like California right now with $6 a gallon gasoline? What's your plan to make things inexpensive? What's your plan to reduce the debt? What are your plans on things? I don't need to see you. And I'm talking people in the middle, right? The people the fence sitters that can kind of go either way. You are not moving. You're not really appealing to anyone other than a hardcore TDS far leftist person to do these tweets on Trump. Oh yeah, you got him. If you want to be a serious contender for 2028, you've got to be above this. You've got to then show what are your plans? What is this guy going to be like when he's in? If he's just Mr. Morphy McMorferson over to whatever personality fits for that day that he likes, it's just not going to work.
But hear me push back on that. And Kelly, I want to get your thoughts on this too in a second. But do we want someone who rises above the fray? Because I don't think the electorate has shown that they want a politician.
I guess, no, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's a good point. I just think the fray with Donald Trump is over. I just think it's over. It doesn't matter now. There's no benefit to you to go toe to toe with Donald Trump. It helps you zero at this point in the game. At least that's my take on it.
See, Kelly, I have a different take on this. I think because Trump is still the loudest voice in the room and will be for the next 3 years, and he will be holding the megaphone as these presidential candidates are ramping up for 2028 and the midterms. I think what Governor Newsom is trying to do here is show, why is there one set of rules for Donald Trump? Why is he allowed to communicate in this way and it's been normalized? I want people to see what it looks like when someone who isn't Donald Trump communicates this way, and ask yourselves, is this really what we want? Is this really the kind of relationship we want to have with a sitting president? I just think I think it's at this stage in the game when we're still so far out, it's definitely a troll. I think politically it's pretty smart.
I would have to agree with you. Politically, it's pretty smart. A lot of people are beginning to look at this and say, wow, this is really working. But again, all of this right now reminds me of the theater of the absurd.
Yes. Too true.
And I'm thinking, wait a minute now, we are, and forgive me for going moral, spiritual, but we are one nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all. I get so tired of the political aspects where we're fighting each other, demonizing each side, rather than finding a way to find common ground through good common values to build up a nation that is strong, stronger than ever before. And the only way we do that is to really humble ourselves before a loving God and thanking God for our blessings. And if I can go really biblical from Isaiah 58, uh, where the people of Israel were on a fast, and they were complaining to God, saying, "You're not answering our prayer. You're not doing any of this." And I feel that we as America, we're looking at God saying, "Ah, we don't care about you. You're not really caring about us. And look at the politics in our country. We hate each other. We're woke. We're unwoke. We're left. We're right. We're all up. You know." The bottom line is this: as I look at all this theory of the absurd with politics leading up to 2026 and then 2028, I keep thinking about what God told them. He said, "I didn't call you to a fast where you maliciously wound each other and talk about each other and point fingers at each other. I set you free, and I hope that you will set the captives free and help people and restore their streets of dwelling." That to me is good government. And, and so when I think about these memes, yeah, it's entertaining, it's amusing, but it is so absurd when we've got so much at stake. And I'm not running for office. Let me make that very clear. But when I'm looking at this and I report on it, I'm thinking, well, what about my grandchildren? And what about the children in high school and college? And what about the young people in Washington, D.C. who aspire to do the same things that the young people at the White House do? Work for living and work to make this country better. And then I see what Gavin Newsom is doing. And really, it really is a form of flattery and a form of compliment to President Trump for the plan that he's utilized to make it work, because people in MAGA love what he does. And now, again, when Gavin Newsom is doing it, it's a copycat, but it's also working on his plan. But is this what it's come to? How many memes we can make and how many things we can text? That's going to be good governing?
Right.
I don't think so.
Well, and I'll just throw in my last point on to defend myself here. Trump is not running. So, like, what are you at the end of this in a couple of years and you're doing your meme battles with Trump? What do you have to show for it? Hey, I can meme with the best of them now. The meme king and President Trump, I out memed him. Now what? Someone else is running.
He's
Right.
not running, but he's still on the ballot.
In charge.
He's still in charge. And when people go to vote, they will be thinking about what the Republican Party has become. And that is the party of President Donald J. Trump.
Yeah,
And
well,
so
I mean, until
that's
someone
why,
else is on the ticket, until it's Vance, until it's, then you've got to deal with JD Vance, who's, yes, in sort of in the MAGA sphere, but he's also a lot different. He is way more sort of precise with his language, and certainly more skilled in some of those areas where Trump is not.
Yeah.
And, Trump obviously is skilled in a lot of other areas, like the art of nicknaming and memeing and those sorts of things. He's a king of that. But Vance has different strengths, so we'll see.
And
well,
Dan,
it could be Marco Rubio could be in there as well.
Yeah.
right. Now, Dan, your point is well taken. I 100%
Very
agree
well
with you.
taken.
And I don't anticipate this being a long-term strategy for Newsom either. I think this is a few weeks, few months thing. I don't think this is going to be. I don't think we're going to see Gavin Newsom's account continuing to tweet like this, 2 years from now. I think it's kind of one of those in the moment, splashy type, hey, burst, kind of get attention type deals. And I don't know how long it's going to go. I don't anticipate it being for a really long time, but who knows? Like you said, Kelly, the theater of the absurd, it's kind of the existence we are living in here in August of 2025. We're going to have to leave things there, gentlemen. But thank you both for joining me here at Navigating Trump 2.0. Dan Andros, Kelly Wright, thanks once again. We'll talk to you next week here on Navigating Trump 2.0.